Hello and welcome to The Point World Affairs. I'm your host, Daniel Chen. On our program, we delve a little deeper into some of the stories making headlines around the world. And to help us dissect them to digestible bites, we have Song Se-ryun, professor of law from Kyung-hee University, joining us in the studio. Thank you for being here.
Good to be back.
And Professor, I understand you have some interesting stories prepared for us today. Let us just get straight to the point.
Right, there are many stories and had a little bit of trouble picking the worthy ones, but here are my choices. Standoff, escalating tension, and redo.
3 keywords, 3 stories to be unveiled. Let's find out what standoff represents first.
Okay.
The trade conflict between the U.S. and China is deepening, with the two nations failing to reach a deal. The global economy faces growing uncertainty as a trade war between the world's 2 superpowers is forecast to persist for a prolonged period of time.
We don't have to do business with them. We don't have to do business. We can make the product right here if we have to, like we used to. Remember? Like we used to.
The U.S. has recently announced higher tariffs on $300 billion worth of Chinese products, following an earlier tax hike on Chinese imports worth $200 billion. It virtually means every Chinese goods entering the American market is subject to tariffs amounting to 25%. China holds the biggest volume of U.S. treasuries in the world at $1.13 trillion, and selling the debt could deal a heavy blow to the American economy. To offset the impact of the U.S. tariff hike, it's highly likely that Beijing could depreciate the yuan's value. However, chances remain for the two sides to reach an agreement. There's still some time before the U.S. tariff hike on Chinese goods takes effect. The trade talks will most likely resume next month, as Presidents Donald Trump and Xi Jinping are expected to hold a meeting to discuss the issue on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Japan in June.
Go with guts, live with the consequences seems to be the approach by President Donald Trump. But of course, those who are paying the price are the Americans and the companies that's involved in trade with China. And it seems like China is unafraid to play the long game.
I think they're afraid a little bit, but I don't think they're intending to show it. Stakes are high on both sides, and actually stakes are high for the rest of the world because of the economic importance of China and the U.S. I think that there will be some kind of agreements between the two because of the willingness to engage in trade talks. But however, I think that the root cause of this system differences between the U.S. and China. So even with some agreements, probably there will be a lot of dissensions going forward. For example, state capitalism of China cannot be changed in a moment, and also the mode of the development that the China has is tied to the political systems and how they run the country. So I think that we haven't heard the last of their disputes and spats.
Short-term pains for long-term gains, we hope.
Right.
Moving on, let's check out the next keyword you have prepared for us today.
Right. Escalating tension.
2 oil tankers from Saudi Arabia have been sabotaged off the coast of Fujairah in eastern United Arab Emirates. One of the damaged vessels was reportedly attacked while en route to the U.S. with crude oil. Fujairah port is located 140 kilometers south of the Strait of Hormuz, where Iran warned of blocking as a countermeasure against U.S. sanctions. In response to Iran's threat to close the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. deployed aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and B-52 bombers to reinforce its troops in the Middle East. Air Force commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps hinted at a possible counterattack. Tehran's foreign ministry has called for clarification and details of the attacks on the Saudi ships. It expressed strong concern over the irrelevant intention of harming the stability of the region, and also added Iran is not responsible for the particular incident. Last year, U.S. President Donald Trump has reimposed sanctions against Iran by unilaterally withdrawing from the nuclear deal signed in 2015 with the Middle Eastern country and a group of world powers. Tehran announced it will take steps to suspend the agreement unless the sanctions are lifted.
Saber-rattling this time with Iran. Some are saying the motive is childish and the goal could be selfish on the part of the Trump administration. But although there are some questionable choices being made, and of course Iran responding with aggressive countermeasures, do you feel like we can't just normalize Trump's actions if there's one lesson we've learned so far from the way he runs the country?
Right, well, we could say that, but the stake is so high in this region because of the tangled web of relationships. It's not just Iran's nuclear relationship, but lurking in the background is the relationship between Saudi Arabia, Israel, the desire to help out those countries from the U.S. side. And I think ultimately it's a domestic issue as well because he wants to please the base by helping out those neighbors. So in that sense, the motivation to go to the brinkmanship again on this issue is kind of dubious, but here we are. Iran has threatened the retaliation, and they have been kind of honing on resisting or standing up against the U.S., and they had decades of practice. So potentially this can be lengthened, and potentially this could escalate in the region, not only between the Iran and the U.S., but if we can count the Israel and Saudi Arabia willing to take some actions and military actions at the drop of a provocation, probably we're looking at some sort of big explosives getting ready to be thrown into the deal.
Right. There were also reports of some of Trump's aides saying that Trump wanted to talk about bombing Iran, reviewing military plans. It looks like the U.S. is still reeling from the impact of the war with Iraq. Can they afford to get involved in another conflict?
Right. Because of that reason, I think the first thing to do is kind of reining in the hawkish faction in the U.S. side, Bolton and Pompeo as well. I think the dialogues that Obama has and the previous administration has accomplished, I think is a laudable one, a faulty one, but laudable one, because that presupposed the dialogues and the diplomatic the routes to solve these grave issues. I think that has to be revisited in some ways. I think that we're kind of far down the road to revive it the way it was before, but I think that the change of course of action is warranted.
We're almost halfway through Trump's presidency. Let's hope there's some method to his madness from here on.
I hope so.
Let's check out the last keyword you have chosen for us today.
Redo.
Ekrem İmamoğlu, an opposition candidate who has won Istanbul's mayoral election in March, was forced from his office after serving his duties for just 20 days. The removal took place as Turkish President Recep Erdogan and the ruling party, which lost their political home ground, said the election was affected by, quote, organized crime and serious corruption.
İstanbul Büyükşehir Belediye Başkanlığı seçimlerinde organize bir yolsuzluk ve tam kanunsuzluk, usulsüzlük hali olduğuna samimi olarak inanıyoruz.
Turkey's election board announced the nullification of the election results, claiming some papers had not been signed and that the rerun will be held on June 23rd. The opposition party held rallies strongly opposing the decision.
Değerli hemşehrilerim, kazandığımız bu seçimi 31 Mart akşamı elimizden almaya çalıştılar. Emeğimizi çalmaya çalıştılar.
As such, President Erdogan has come under fire by the Turkish people and the international community. Erdogan carried out a structural reform to the presidential system, which beefed up his authority.
The largest city in the country has been under control of the Erdogan's ruling party for close to a quarter of a century. I guess they were afraid they could not afford this blemish, and they wanted to reset things and go for a revote.
Right. It's not just a blemish. Erdogan was the mayor of Istanbul, but I think that this is a sad story to me because not only for the Turkey, but for the region. Turkey has been such a shining beacon when it achieved the economic success and also a democracy in terms of having a secular regime with the religious sentiment to it. But it has digressed. He became a dictator, and now this election brouhaha means that it has further regressed into such a state where it's going to be hard to recover for the Turkey, and by extension, the region has lost the model.
A crucial turning point for Turkey. Thank you so much for these exciting stories and the keywords you've carefully selected for us today, Professor. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The point highlights the 2 soldiers of the French Special Forces that sacrificed their lives in a rescue mission in West Africa. French commandos have freed 4 tourists held captive by local militants in Burkina Faso. 2 French nationals, 1 American woman, and a South Korean woman were kidnapped while traveling in the region, which South Korea and France advised people to either not to go or to leave. 2 French soldiers were killed in the rescue operation.
Nos premières pensées vont aux 2 militaires qui ont donné leur vie pour nous libérer de cet enfer. Nous présentons nos sincères condoléances à leurs familles et à leurs proches.
A formal memorial service for the 2 fallen soldiers were held at Les Invalides in Paris on May 14th.
Au nom de la République française, nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur.
A large number of people gathered and expressed their condolences.
Le maître Cédric de Pierrepont et le maître Alain Bertoncello n'hésitèrent pas un seul instant, défiant la mort pour sauver des vies, faisant preuve d'une bravoure inouïe. Ils pénétrèrent, armes tenues silencieuses, dans les tentes. La mission était un succès, mais nos 2 soldats n'étaient plus.
Opinions are clearly divided. Some say it is fortunate that the hostages have returned unharmed, but others are criticizing that it was the result of a reckless decision to defy the government's advice and to go ahead traveling these dangerous regions, costing the lives of the soldiers. The importance of following the government's travel guidelines has been once again highlighted.
D'abord que les conseils aux voyageurs que le ministère des Affaires étrangères diffuse régulièrement doit être respecté intégralement. Les conseils aux voyageurs, ce ne sont pas des vœux pieux, ce sont des incitations impératives.
Following the incident, many countries are considering designating part of Burkina Faso as a no-travel zone.
It's time to delve a little deeper into our main issue for this episode. French Special Forces rescued 4 hostages in West Africa in Burkina Faso. They were rescued safely, but unfortunately, lives were lost during the process. One concerning fact is that people are still traveling to these dangerous regions in Burkina Faso, even if there are warnings by the government.
Right. First of all, we have to place the primary responsibility and the blame to the terrorists. And those soldiers who died in the line of their duty are the heroes, and we have to really honor them. But at the same time, ultimately, if you're traveling outside your country, anywhere, the safety is ultimately your responsibility. Government can do so much by putting out the advisory. So you have to really take in some responsibility because you're assuming the too much risk if you disregard. And it's your choice to disregard the advisory and the warnings that has been put forward.
Right, we'll continue this conversation in a short while. For now, Professor Song, we are going to connect via Skype with a local expert for more details on this matter. Frederic Arirang, a professor of political science, University of Arirang, is with us right now. Hello.
Hello.
Well, first and foremost, our deepest condolences to the 2 soldiers who gave their lives to rescue the hostages. What is the overall reaction from the French government and the people on the hostage rescue mission?
Well, actually, the French public opinion is massively in support of the French army and the troops. There was a beginning of a polemic recently, starting even by some official words by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, saying that the two hostages had been very imprudent and should have been much more careful in going to a very risky region, a region that was indicated as a dangerous one on the website of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But actually, the polemic, which started a little bit in the newspapers or on some social networks, did not last very long. In France, you have a very huge support of the population towards the French army, towards the French military army, which doesn't mean, of course, that there is no analysis, that there is no debate. You could hear some voices saying that maybe it was too much to pay a tribute that big and that moving to the troops every time we had to rescue hostages, because it could be used by the hostage takers and all the terrorists themselves. Other voices, other analysts also said or wrote that maybe the fact of receiving, welcoming the hostages in France by the president himself every time there was a hostage crisis was already maybe too much. Of course, you can have this kind of debate, but more deeply, the situation is that of a deep support to the French armed forces, which doesn't mean that the French population knows its army very well, which doesn't mean that everybody is perfectly aware of international situations, but globally the image of the army is good, the trust in the army is pretty good in France today.
Well, Frederick, thank you so much again for your time and your expertise. Coming back to you, Professor Song, it looks like the situation was a lot more serious than I guess the government initially anticipated, because the troop that was dispatched for the rescue mission, they are the creme de la creme of the French troops, somewhat comparable to Navy SEALs or Korea's UDT.
Right.
And even these men, they managed to come out with casualties.
Right, those are certainly elite forces, and France has some history of having a heroic rescue missions in the past. So I don't doubt that they are really capable of doing this. But at the same time, the terrorist groups there are really motivated these days, I think. After the fall of IS, there has been some broadcast of mobilization worldwide to rise up and do terrorist activities.
Right,
So
we're
in
hearing that
sense,
there are even unusual, unexpected team-ups and collaborations between differing factions.
Right, especially in that region. So in that sense, pretty interesting region to visit, I guess, to study if you're into those. But at the same time, that raises the level of threat and level of security concerns. So in that sense, I don't really advocate the state saying that the traveling to those regions are prohibited or anything like that. I think you have to kind of temper with the liberty that people have to move and do the things that they're interested in. But at the same time, safety, as I mentioned before, is ultimately the responsibility of those who are committing to it.
Right, at your own risk, you're willing to risk it all. You may travel, but do not expect the government to suddenly swoop in and rescue you. Although lives were lost in the line of duty, we will find solace in the fact that 4 hostages were rescued to safety.
Right.
Now it's time to spin the globe for some interesting happenings in various corners of our world. Our first stop is Peru.
Walking up and down the runway are models showing off their stylish looks. Some of the hottest items include casual wears and an all-white wedding dress. The models on the stage are, in fact, prisoners behind bars. Mothers in a women's prison in Lima are celebrating Mother's Day with a fashion show. The clothes and accessories are designed and crafted by the inmates, and part of the profits generated by the fashion show will be used to support the victims of the crimes.
Estamos impulsando la creación de una marca que se llama Hope, que en inglés significa esperanza. ¿no? Porque es la esperanza de todas. Todas tenemos un sueño y para alcanzar nuestro sueño.
Just like the show they had, we wish the ladies see a bright future.
Next up, Republic of South Africa.
Are you tired of going for the same ice cream that everyone gets all the time? Then take your ice cream game up a notch by getting a maggot-flavored ice cream. If you're still interested, you can get your delicious insect gelato at an ice cream joint at Cape Town University of Technology in South Africa. The idea of using insects as a food source has gained traction over the last few years. Snacks made out of insects are perceived as more environmental friendly because harvesting insects requires almost no supply of land, water, and food.
Certainly from an environmental perspective, they're less damaging than the meat industry, which currently accounts for about 25% of global emissions, and that's a huge concern.
According to the brave people who have already tried the ice cream, the taste isn't too bad either. And that means it might be time to buy a bug net and start hunting our food supplies ourselves.
Let's sail to China.
Soon to be the biggest airport in the world, Beijing Daxing International Airport, which is set to open in September, has started its test flights on May 13. Covering an area of 47 square kilometers, the new airport has a bright red roof depicting a burning phoenix and a radial structured body built with 5 outstretched legs. The Air Hub, along with Beijing Capital International Airport, will serve as the Chinese capital's 2 largest airports.
We head over to Japan now.
There are dancers on the stage and in the stands. Participants are wearing outfits of their favorite characters from animations and video games. Welcome to an event recently organized by Nico Nico, Japan's biggest online video community. Famously known as the most passionate fans of the culture, the Japanese anime fans are supporting their favorite characters in their own unique ways.
私はアニメのキャラクターとかがとっても好きなのと、あとは、いつも自分のメイクとは違ったメイクをすることで、とてもその日はハッピーな気持ちになれるので、コスプレをしています。
The 2-day event, which takes place every year, attracted 168,000 offline visitors and roughly 6.7 million online visitors this year. It was an event full of people showing passion for what they love.
Last but not least, the US of A.
Everyone calls this tabby cat Surgeon Stubbs because he resembles a crippled character in the movie Forrest Gump. The stray was found last year with infected back legs after getting hit by a train. Recently, Stubbs got his legs back. His legs were created with 3D printer by a group of engineering students at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thanks to their prosthetics, the cat has learned how to walk again and also found a new home.
I think I get a much more cushy life. You never know if Stubbs was a happy street cat, I don't know, but I know he's a very happy cat now.
Stubbs is one lucky cat with a new set of legs and a family.
Words that spring to mind is slimy yet satisfying from The Lion King. Insects, they've came in fried rice, candies, hard candies, and perhaps ice cream would be a nice way to smoothly make the transition for your palates. Maggots.
But maggot. But I think I understand that the explosion of the population, the experts' prediction is that the Earth, the way we have our resources out there, is not sustainable to support the kind of explosion we have. So we have to look for other ways.
We cannot not talk about Lieutenant Dan, the cat who got a prosthetic to help him move around with more agility, with greater agility and mobility.
It's amazing how the technology and the medical science is advancing leaps and bounds these days. the 3D printing for the medical uses and the stem cells and whatnots. I think we're looking at a really breakthrough of kind of reversing the kind of a father time and the threats of diseases. So this kind of news gives a hope, and I hope, and everybody, including myself, would be a beneficiary down the road.
Professor Song, we appreciate you coming in to make our program complete today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that's all the stories we have brought with us for you today. For more, do tune in again same time next week for a brand new episode of The Point World Affairs. Thank you so much for watching.